very risky for a chancellor to try and write future budgets in a world as uncertain as ours.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player, and the new LBC app. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Disaster. 242 people on board the Airbus 787 Dreamliner, which went down within minutes of taking off in Ahmedabad, Western India. It was due to land in Gatwick in about 20 minutes' time. Of those on board, 169 held Indian passports and 53 were British. There was a giant fireball, but quite remarkably, it seems that one person, a British citizen, has survived. The aircraft barely made it into the air before crashing, with its wheels still down, into a doctor's hostel near the airfield. The why is still unclear, but airstrikes by birds or some catastrophic mechanical failure are considered by experts much more likely than terrorism. Let's talk first to our reporter at Gatwick Airport, Joseph Draper. Joseph.
Well, Andrew, that flight from India was due to arrive here in less than half an hour. But of course, those loved ones who were on their way here, hoping to be reunited with their families, will never get that opportunity. The Air India desk here is completely empty, and there's been a strange juxtaposition today, watching the families, the people coming to this airport, their suitcases behind them, excited, happy to get away on their holiday. Planes, of course, still departing right across the world. And yet, we have had those terrible images from across the world. A really stark contrast. And we know now 242 people, Andrew, on board that flight, including 53 British people, 11 children, the vast majority, feared dead. But remarkably, Andrew, we've had a small glimmer of hope this afternoon. One British national, a father of one, believed to be the sole survivor of this flight, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh. He's 40 years old, and he was sat on seat 11A, and it's being described, Andrew, as the miracle of 11A. And a miracle it truly is. He's described how trouble started just 30 seconds after the plane took off, describing how terrifying it must have been on board, saying to reporters in India he has absolutely no idea how he survived. And we know, quite tragically, Andrew, he was on that flight with his brother, AJ. He was on a different seat. They weren't next to each other. We don't know his fate yet, although we can assume that he has passed, like the majority of other passengers on that flight. Remarkably, though, Vishwas escaped with only minor injuries. Videos showing him staggering away from the wreckage. He appears to have some injuries on his feet, we're told, on his chest. Nothing he can't recover from, though. He is expected to make a full recovery. And Vishwas's cousin, Ajay Valgi, spoke to the BBC outside his home in Leicestershire. He spoke to Vishwas. He said he spoke to Vishwas on the phone earlier today.
He only said that he's fine, nothing else.
So Vishwas called the family and said he's fine?
Yeah, he's fine. I said nothing else.
And what happened to his brother, you said? He was sat with his brother on the...
Yeah, they were sitting next to each other. But we don't know what happened to his brother. We've not heard anything.
And there are the first reports, Andrew, of other British passengers emerging. Their names, including, tragically, we're told, a family from Gloucestershire. Husband Akhil Nanabawa, his wife Hannah Varaji, and their young daughter Sarah. And no doubt, Andrew, the next few hours will bring yet news as that death toll rises, as more bodies are identified. We're told relatives are being asked to come forward to provide DNA samples to help identify the dead. Presumably that will include family members here in Gatwick. We know the airport has a centre that they've set up for them, a room where they can provide them with information, support. should they need it. I'm sure they'll be anxiously waiting for information on the fates of their loved ones. And we know Air India has a helpline for families travelling to India from the UK. I will just read that out now for our viewers, just so they've got it. It's 0091 806 277 9200. And we know, Andrew, as well, the owners of Air India who operated that flight have pledged to pay £86,000 to each of those people who died. Now, that is a small consolation, perhaps. Clearly, though, Andrew, it's never going to be enough to heal the pain those families must be feeling, not just here in Gatwick, across the world. Nationals from across the world on that flight. Lots of people today mourning the loss of loved ones. Joseph Draper reporting live.
Thank you, Joseph. Let's get now the reaction from Lord Karan Bilimoria, co-chair of the India All-Party Parliamentary Group, entrepreneur and crossbench peer. Lord Bilimoria, thank you for joining us. A very, very difficult day for huge numbers of people, but particularly perhaps for the British Indian community.
This is absolutely tragic and awful. These things happen very suddenly, completely unpredicted, and a tragedy that is unimaginable. The fact that this happened in Ahmedabad, a city, for me, my great-grandmother lived there, my father's family, many members of them come from Ahmedabad. I know many people there. It's just tragic. And we've got Indian nationals and, of course, British nationals as well. Yes. And you know, what everyone thinks at this time is, what happened? How could this have happened? How could anyone have seen the sad film of the plane taking off and then, crashing? How could that have happened in an aircraft that has had a safety record that's been excellent, this Boeing 787?
Yes.
I don't think that they've ever had a crash. And the reality is that air travel is by far one of the safest forms of travel. You're more likely to die in a car crash than in an aeroplane crash.
Yeah. Well, this is the great dilemma that we're going to be looking at, I'm sure. Just in terms of the kind of people who have been on this plane, Lord Bilimoria, you mentioned you know the city. It's a great textile centre, a great industrial centre, a very fast-growing city, one of the sort of liveliest and I think most popular cities in Western India. In fact, I think it's called the Manchester of India, they call it, don't they?
Well, Ahmedabad is a city that is actually booming. It is Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India's home city. It is the capital of Gujarat, his home state. It is the state, Gujarat, where my community, Zoroastrian Parsis, settled over 1,000 years ago. And it's traditionally been a state that has done extremely well commercially. And of course, when it comes to the Indian diaspora in the UK, the Indian diaspora is the largest ethnic minority community in the country with almost 2 million people. And one of the largest communities within that is the Gujarati community that come from Gujarat, from Ahmedabad. So this is going to be hitting a lot of people in the UK, the living bridge between the UK and India. We're all in mourning and we're all thinking, how could this have happened? Of course, the thing is, this Air India was a government-owned airline that was not doing well at all. It was making huge losses. And then the good news was Tata's, one of the largest companies in India, bought Air India recently. And everyone rejoiced, saying, this is it. Air India is now going to be one of the best airlines in the world. They've got one of the biggest airplane orders in history. There are 470 aircraft from Airbus and Boeing on order for Air India. They reach almost over 40 cities within India and over 40 cities around the world. This is going to be one of the largest airlines in the world. And Tata's as a company have a stellar track record. Of course, they own Jaguar Land Rover in the UK, Tata Steel in the UK. And when the tragedy took place at the Taj Mahal Hotel, if you remember, on 26 November 2008, Ratan Tata at that time, the way in which he dealt with the victims, families, with all his staff, it's legendary. Not only the compassion that he showed, not only the money that was given, children of the victims to this day have been educated by the Tatas and by Ratan Tata. So when a tragedy like this happens, it's sad beyond belief. It's how you behave, how you try and look after people at a time like this that really matters. And the good news in that sense, if one can use the term good news in a tragedy, is that the Tatars are the company that own this airline. And I have faith, will do their utmost to help everyone involved.
Well, after the grieving, a lot of healing, a lot of rebuilding still to come. Lord Bilimoria, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Another story that's been developing throughout the day is over the American and Israeli warnings to Iran after the UN concluded they're not meeting their nuclear obligations. We're going to talk about that with a veteran international correspondent, and we'll hear from a former Chancellor of the Exchequer about Rachel Reeves's spending review. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr. Time now 6:13.
LBC.
Today.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:14. As with every budget and every big economic event in Parliament, the truth only begins to become clear the day after, when journalists and economists have had time to pore over the details, pick out the key points and all of that. Well, my next guest, the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond's here with me in the studio to give me his reaction to yesterday's spending statement by Rachel Reeves. Whatever view you take of it, Philip, it was a big event, wasn't it? Big numbers and big decisions.
Oh, it certainly was, and it sets the course for the rest of this Parliament, and essentially it sets out the government stall for the clash of ideas that will come at the next general election.
I said yesterday that, we are both an economy which needs to grow, and Rachel Reeves has her view about how we can grow, but we're also an economy on the edge. How dangerous do you think things are looking ahead at the bond markets?
Underlying this spending review, which is essentially about allocating an envelope of money that she'd already identified, is a very significant increase in the level of borrowing compared to what was being forecast in the spring budget 2024. So the government has made a decision, a choice, to borrow a lot more money and to use much of it on capital spending projects. The problem is that the bond markets are fragile. They're concerned about the UK economy. They're also concerned about wider events going on around the world, in particular potential disruption to trade patterns and economic growth from the Trump tariff initiatives. And interest rates are stubbornly higher than everybody had expected them to be by now, a few years ago. So borrowing extra money that doesn't come free. We already spend more than we spend on education and policing.
About 100 billion a year, I think,
on just servicing our debt. And as the debt gets bigger and we borrow more, that number's going to go up. And that's £100 billion that we can't spend on healthcare or defence or other important things.
It's a very, very difficult dilemma, because at the same time we also do need to grow as an economy, and that means better infrastructure. It means putting money into AI, putting money into the defence industries and the rest of it, and indeed get into nuclear power, because we have a big energy challenge ahead of us as well.
I think you're absolutely right, but the lesson to take away from this, and I'm afraid a lot of people won't like it, is that we need to think like an economy that is more or less developing. We need to grow. Growth is urgent, and we need to ensure that the money we do have available, we spend on the things that will deliver growth. And that's what I thought I heard Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves promising during the election campaign. But if you want my personal view, too much of the spending that's been announced has been spending that will, if you like, is crowd pleasers rather than money that will actually fix the underlying problem. Because if we fast forward 20 years, 30 years, the issue here is if we have not invested in our economic growth and have not delivered stronger economic growth, we will not be arguing at the margin. We simply won't be able to afford the quality public services that everybody wants to have.
You understand much, much more about this than I do, but can I push back just a little and say that if in 30, 40 years we have much better transport links between Birmingham and Leeds and Liverpool and Manchester in the north, if we have 3 or 4 modular nuclear reactors around the country pumping power into the grid and so on, that is actually about growth as well.
Totally agree. And where capital is being directed to supply-side improvements, as economists would say, things that make the economy work better, that enable the demand for goods and services to be met, then that will be a positive for economic growth. But you have to look at the economic growth challenge in the round. The planning system, which the government says it is radically reforming, needs, I'm afraid, rather more radical reform than the government is proposing. And the labour market is still not working for British business. I'm afraid there is not enough labour to meet the demand that this economy is presenting.
I'm glad you raised that, because this is something you've been talking about for a long time. And, you know, when we hear about the huge 1.5 million new homes promised from Angela Rayner and the government, it strikes me that a lot of people think in the industry there simply aren't enough brickies and electricians and plumbers and the rest of it and tilers to make it. They're right.
There aren't. It's one thing to find the money to deliver new homes infrastructure, but we also have to face the reality that you need land, which means planning reform, and you need labour, which means you've either got to get a lot higher proportion of our own working age population into work, or you've got to allow at least short-term migration of labour to deliver that essential work, whether it's...
And we know how popular that is.
Well, we know how popular that is, and that's the point, isn't it? But if you want the homes, you want the healthcare, you want the fruit picked from the fields, you want the chickens in the supermarket, somebody has got to do the work.
Let me ask you about one. You were former Foreign Secretary, former Defence Secretary. We seem to be on the edge of an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. Just give us your sense of how dangerous you think this moment could be.
Well, the first thing I should say is that I've been involved in the Iran-Israel story for at least a decade when I was Foreign Secretary in 2014. Yes. And we've always been, apparently, on the edge of an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. So, and obviously I don't have access to classified information anymore, so I don't know if anything has changed that really makes that more likely. But I think the Israelis and the Americans have always been clear that they would use every capability they have to prevent Iran from developing a viable nuclear weapon. And from what I hear, it seems that Iran is very close to that capability. I thought the Americans were on the brink of a diplomatic breakthrough with Iran.
That seems not to be the case, doesn't it?
It does, but Iran is in a very much weakened position over the last year, 18 months, and I would hope that pressure short of an all-out attack on Iran might be able to achieve the laudable objective of preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Philip Hammond, thank you very much indeed. And let me carry on directly with that story and the main story of the day, because air travel, of course, remains relatively safe, and it's been getting safer. So far this year, there have been 5 major fatal accidents, of which today's was by far the worst. And that compares to an average of around 7 a year. But compared to the 1970s, for instance, the global fatal accident rate has fallen dramatically. And as we've just heard, the more flight paths are constricted by war or tension, such as over Iran, the more planes are pushed into relatively narrow funnels, and therefore, perhaps, the more dangerous. Now, that is very much an appropriate topic today, with reports, as we've just been discussing, that Israel could be close to to launching an attack on Iran. Americans have been withdrawing diplomats from the region in preparation, and the World Affairs editor for The Independent, Sam Kiley, has been following these reports all day. Sam, thank you very much indeed for joining me. It's very hard to gauge what's about to happen, but when President Trump removes so many diplomats from around the region so quickly, you must be concerned that we are on the edge of something quite big.
Yeah, I think that as there has been this incremental movement by Iran, and now the United Nations, IAEA, the body in charge that has people on the ground of invigilating Iran's nuclear program. It has a legal civilian one and one in international terms that it's not supposed to be conducting, which is the weapons program. They have now, for the first time in 20 years, said that the Iranians are not living up to their non-proliferation obligations. That means, in decoded terms, they seem to be building a bomb. That is the trigger point, particularly for the Israelis, who believe that they're in danger, an existential danger of being wiped off the face of the earth, as repeated presidents of the Iranian regime have said in the past. And they are very close to the Americans. The Americans are putting their troops on standby. 20,000 anti-aircraft rockets that were destined for Ukraine have been diverted by the Americans to their own defensive capabilities across the Gulf and the Middle East, because if there was an Israeli airstrike, there's bound to be a counterattack from Iran, and that would mean that particularly American resources in the Gulf, especially just across the water there from Iran, would be vulnerable. So I think this is, Jeremy Hunt's absolutely right. We're always on the brink of one of these attacks, but it's more brinkish than before.
And to be absolutely clear, the Israelis were talking about taking out the military nuclear capabilities of Iran a few weeks ago, before the Americans got involved in the latest failed diplomatic attempt. And it's a moment when Iran is relatively weak in terms of its proxies around the region, the Houthis and and Hezbollah and Hamas. So if the Israelis were going to do it, it's the kind of time they might be thinking about.
Yeah, it's not a bad time from their perspective. It's a pretty bad time from America's perspective. They are already being criticized in the Middle East for their support for Israel's campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. But, as you say, from the Israeli perspective, at the moment, their international reputation is rock bottom. So it's not a bad opportunity to go after the Iranian nuclear capabilities if, as I say, they really genuinely believe that they pose an existential threat. I should also add there, Andrew, that historically Mossad, the foreign affairs spy agency of the Israelis, have always advised against this.
Yeah, indeed. A dangerous moment. Sam Kiley, thank you very much for that. Now, as we've heard, there were some very big investment decisions announced by the government this week. The biggest winner by far has been the NHS. So my next guest, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, should be wearing a broad grin. But he might also have a few faint worry lines across his forehead, because now he's got the money, there is nowhere to hide. He has to deliver those big Labour promises on the NHS. The first was that 92% of patients should be seen in 18 weeks or less by the end of this Parliament. The interim goal is to get to 65% by next March, and Labour is also committed to delivering another 2 million additional operations, scans and appointments within the first year. That deadline isn't far away. So are these promises the Health Secretary is now sure of keeping? I put that question to him this afternoon, but we started our conversation with reaction to that awful crash in India earlier on.
It's utterly devastating, and the scenes we've seen emerge throughout today are truly horrifying. And when you look at the numbers, obviously, significant number of British nationals on that flight, 53, as well as 169 Indian nationals, a Canadian and 7 Portuguese nationals too. We've set up a crisis response through the Foreign Office. Anyone who is concerned they may have loved ones involved should call 0207 008 5000. A reception centre for families has been set up by Gatwick Airport, and the government is working with both Gatwick Airport and local authorities to ensure families and friends are supported in the coming days. And that's in addition to our High Commissioner being on the ground as we speak. So we're following this closely. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has given an update to Parliament. The Prime Minister's monitoring this closely. And aside from that, I mean, I think just like all of your listeners, my heart goes out to those people who have just confronted with the grim reality of what's happened today.
A truly horrific event indeed. Can I turn to the consequences of the spending review yesterday, Wes, which is that you have been one of the really big winners. You look at all the statistics in terms of day-to-day spending and also capital spending, the NHS has done exceptionally well. Does that mean that you are on course to answer your promise as a Labour government that 92% of people will be seen within 18 weeks by the end of this Parliament?
Yes, I mean, that is our headline commitment in our plan for change. And what the spending review does on top of the budget is put wind in the sails of the progress we're already making. I mean, happily today I can report that since we came to power, we've taken nearly 250,000 cases off NHS waiting lists. They're at now the lowest they've been for 2 years. And the figures published today, which are for April, which is always a challenging month for the NHS, actually the first time in 17 years we've actually cut waiting lists during that month. So there are encouraging signs. I think all I'd want to say, though, to your listeners is that progress, 250,000, is against the backdrop of a waiting list that's over 7 million. So as ever, I report on the progress positively to report back on what we're doing and to give people hope and confidence that things are moving in the right direction, but honestly not a hint of complacency. What we're trying to do during this Parliament is a faster reduction in waiting lists than New Labour achieved when the NHS was performing at its very best, and with less money available because the public finances are tight. So it's not easy, but NHS staff are putting their shoulders to the wheel and we're 100% behind them.
So as Health Secretary, I think it's reasonable for me to challenge you a bit more on some of the commitments made at the general election. They include that 65% of people will be under that 18-week deadline by next March, which isn't very far away.
No, it's not.
Are you on target to hit that?
We are. I watch the numbers week by week. The Prime Minister is watching the numbers and calls me in regularly to account. And in fact, I was at a hospital in Derby today with the Chancellor, where we were looking at some really great work we're doing. But I was also asking tough questions of the Trust leadership to say, hang on a minute, everyone else is getting waiting lists down faster. What's going on here? And at that Trust, they'd significantly reduced the number of people waiting over a year, which frankly no one should be waiting over a year. But also just last week they were telling me they had got over 2,000 cases off their waiting list through reformed ways of working and the investment we're putting in. So the NHS is up for this. They're up for the challenge. We know it's not easy, but I'm up with a whole bunch of NHS leaders in Manchester at the moment at the NHS Confederation Conference, and I've been coming here for a while now. I can tell you I've not felt this level of optimism and hope for a very long time. It's quiet, cautious optimism and hope. I don't want to overstate it and over-egg the pudding, but it does feel like we are finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And as one NHS chief exec put it to me, I can see light at the end of the tunnel and I'm finally reassured it's just not an oncoming train. Well, which tells you something about what they've been through.
That is very good. I'm going to ask you about one other commitment you made, because it's a very simple one to understand. You said that you wanted 2 million additional operations and so forth within the first year. And again, we're almost at the first year. Are you on target to hit that?
Oh, we've smashed it. We're already well over 3.6 million additional appointments. And by the time we reach the 1 year anniversary of this Labour government, I'll be able to tell you how well we did in the first year.
You're a straightforward guy. You've got the wind at your back. Would you regard those commitments, those promises made by the Labour government at the time of, immediately after the general election and by you yourself as a resigning matter if you don't meet them?
Well, I don't know about resigning matter. It might be a sacking matter if I don't meet them. I mean, I do take this seriously. I do take the promises we made seriously. And to be honest, when I talked about the quiet, cautious optimism people are feeling in the NHS at the moment, it's because the NHS staff are no different to the rest of the public. People don't really like politicians. They don't really trust what politicians say, and that's because of bitter experience in recent years. I hope that as we're delivering and people begin to see and feel change, that we're not just rebuilding our economy and rebuilding our public services, but we rebuild trust in politics itself as well.
I think that's a really, really important point. So without being silly about it, everybody in the NHS, really everybody across the public sector now has targets they have to hit to keep their jobs. Would you regard your promises as, in a sense, your targets?
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister set me a task. He accepts it's a difficult challenge, but he holds me to account and I hold the system to account. That's how it works. And I'm determined to avoid the scenario where I'm on your programme in the future and you say, you've not hit the target, are you going to resign? I mean, you're doing a good job of trying to get me to commit to resigning before I've even missed the target. So goodness knows what's going to happen if I come on your programme having missed the target.
I'm an optimistic fellow. Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed for talking
Cheers,
to LBC.
Andrew.
Another big day for the assisted dying bill in the Commons tomorrow, as MPs debate further amendments to Kim Leadbeater's bill. We're going to be talking to Kim in just a few minutes, but the time now is 6:32, and Tim Humphreys has your news headlines.
The family of a British passenger who walked away from a plane crash in India say it's a miracle that he survived. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh was among 242 people on a Gatwick-bound flight, which came down just seconds after takeoff on Ahmedabad. It hit a hostel for doctors, and footage shows a huge fireball. The plane should have arrived at Gatwick 5 minutes ago. The King says he's desperately shocked and has asked to be kept up to date. 4 British investigators are flying out to assist with inquiries. The LBC weather, cloudy with patchy rain in the west tonight, clearer in the east. It will be humid in the south with a low of 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35, and now going back to our top story today, tributes have been pouring in from across the political spectrum after that appalling plane crash in India. Our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, is here. Aggie, we've heard from all sorts of political figures. I was just talking to Wes Streeting. Any word yet from the Prime Minister?
Yes, Andrew, we've actually heard from the Prime Minister. He has done an interview, which we can hear a little bit of in the last half hour.
Well, the images and news from India is absolutely devastating, and I speak for the entire country in saying our thoughts are with each and every one of those involved. There will be British and Indian families across the land who are absolutely impacted by this, and our thoughts, first and foremost, are with them. Obviously, the investigation is going on. We've dispatched an investigation team that's been deployed. The Foreign Secretary is leading on this, and we'll obviously update as soon as we can. But we're working with the Indian authorities on this to establish the facts.
Now, he was asked about the survivor, Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, and he responded to that. We are establishing facts. The investigation is ongoing, and we are in constant communication with the Indian authorities. Having spoken to the Foreign Office, it sounds like they have not spoken directly to him yet, so they are not confirming that there is a survivor yet, even though, of course, his relatives have spoken to the media. The Foreign Office today went into what they called crisis mode to support the loved ones. They've set up a dedicated line. Joe Draper, of course, read out that number at the beginning. And we know David Lammy has been in touch with the Indian Foreign Secretary today. The Foreign Office not treating this as suspicious, and there have been these cross-Whitehall talks going on all day between the Prime Minister, the Transport Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, and also officials. And we understand now that the Ambassador and some consular colleagues have arrived at the site. They are establishing facts, and the main reason they say they are there is to support those families.
Well, that's a very, very big and important job, Aggie. Thank you so much for that. Now then, Kim Leadbeater's assisted dying bill is back in the Commons tomorrow. There's been a slight drift of MPs away from support for it, though it's a very imprecise business trying to guess what's actually going to happen. More important, there have been serious worries about whether legally assisted dying could end up being available to young people with anorexia. The bill's supporters have said that because mental health conditions alone can't make someone eligible for assisted dying, this will not be a problem. But there does seem to be a grey area where a mental health condition like severe anorexia causes, for instance, organ failure, technically making that person terminally ill. Kim Leadbeater joined me in the studio, and she first explained to me what stage her bill's at and what's likely to be happening in the Commons tomorrow.
So tomorrow it is day 2 of what we call report stage, and what happens there is we debate amendments to the bill. So some of those amendments, which is basically a different word for changes, will be in my name to strengthen the bill further, and other amendments that other MPs have put forward.
So, Kim, in a sense, this is the last moment to actually change the bill substantially.
In terms of the House of Commons, yes. And then next week, I think it probably will be next week, it could potentially go into July, but I think it's likely to be next Friday, we'll have what's called third reading vote, which would be the moment where the House decides whether it proceeds to the House of Lords.
And you mentioned the House generally. What's your assessment of opinion across the House? I know it's a difficult question to judge, but there have been a few wobblers going against you at the moment, I think. What's the overall picture?
I think you've got a lot of people who are very, very solidly in support of a change of the law, and you've got people who are fundamentally against a change in the law. And you've got a certain number of people in the middle, not that many, I would say, who are still a little bit undecided. Some of those, I think, may jump one way and others will jump the other way. We've had a couple of colleagues come out this way saying they're going to be voting for it, having abstained previously. So I think there'll be a little bit of movement in the middle, but I think things feel fairly solid overall.
Let me ask you about one particular issue which has been raised increasingly, which is the position of people who are suffering from anorexia. Now, the bill as it stands means that if it's a mental health problem by itself, you're not eligible for assisted dying.
Absolutely.
But there is a grey area, which is that if I have a mental health condition, anorexia, and it leads me to starve myself to the point where I've got organ failure, then I am technically on the road to being terminally ill, and that could include me in the bill. And amendments have been made, including by your colleague Naz Shah, to ensure that there is a special cutout for anorexia. Now, there's been a lot of ambiguity about this, so what's going to happen on that?
Yeah, there has been a lot of ambiguity. Clearly, as you've quite rightly said, mental health conditions are not included within the scope of the bill. So you cannot be eligible for an assisted death if you have a mental health condition. And there are obviously multiple assessments of capacity. So someone who has got very severe anorexia, and I've worked with people with anorexia in the past, would be highly, highly unlikely to be deemed to have capacity to make such a decision. Bearing in mind that capacity has to be assessed by 2 doctors, and there would be a compulsory referral to a psychiatrist. It would then go to the panel of experts, where there is another psychiatrist, a social worker, and a legal member. So the bill already is pretty watertight around that. But what I have taken on board is comments from colleagues who are saying there might be a small exception to this. And as a result of that, I accepted the amendment that Naz Shah put forward. Now, that amendment might need some changing if it goes through to the House of Lords, just to make sure it doesn't preclude people who would want to be provided with assistance under the bill, but it does close any sort of loophole, however small it is, and I think it is in reality very, very small. But I've accepted that amendment, and my job is to do anything I can to strengthen the bill.
I'm sure, but in other jurisdictions in the United States, there have been examples of young women with anorexia going through and getting assisted dying.
There's a very, very, very small number of cases that have been cited, and I have to say, the details of those are complex and probably haven't been reported on fully enough in terms of the fact that there could have been other issues. But I think my view is mental health disorders are properly excluded from the concept of the bill, and that is really, really strong. The assessments of capacity, and the other thing, look, if I'm being totally honest, Andrew, is if someone is so poorly with anorexia, the reality is they would not get through the process, because the process will probably take up to a couple of months. And if you are so poorly where you are actually dying, you would not be able to be assessed to have capacity, and you probably wouldn't actually survive long enough to go through the process of assisted dying.
So, final question on this. You are convinced that, a relatively young person who is very, very unwell and is anorexic and looks at this legislation and thinks, this gives me an easy way out, as it were, won't have that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely confident in that. And it hasn't happened in other jurisdictions with very similar laws. So Australia, one of the states there, I was speaking to some of the doctors involved over there, they've never had one single case of somebody with anorexia having an assisted death. The reality is the vast majority of people we're talking about have got cancer. Over 70 to 80% of patients around the world are accessing assisted dying under these very strict criteria. As per my bill, they have some horrible form of cancer which can't be treated.
And involves extreme pain.
Yeah.
Let me ask about you. This is one of those issues which raises great emotions on both sides, and people get very angry and people get very engaged in it. You have been battling this through now for some time. How are you doing?
I'm all right. It's not been easy. It's been emotional because I spend a huge amount of my time talking about death and dying, which I have to say generally I think is a positive thing in that we're having conversations that probably wouldn't have been had without the bill up and down the country. But that's hard. And we've all got our own experiences of loss and bereavement and grief, and that is a very emotional place to be. But my job, I think, has been partly to keep as calm as possible because it is a hugely emotive issue. It means a lot to so many people. I'm spending a lot of time with terminally ill people who are themselves dying, and this legislation means a lot to them. I'm spending a lot of time with bereaved families who have lost loved ones under very difficult circumstances. So that is very emotional, but it also
it must have taken a lot of a toll on you.
Yeah, it's not easy. But what it also does is keep me focused on why the law needs to change. And that's what I ask colleagues to come back to. Look at the detail of the bill and look at how robust it is, because believe me, it is. And I have lived and breathed it, as you say, for quite some time now. But also look at the status quo and look at the suffering that's going on now. And as legislators, we have a duty to do something about that.
Well, it's one way or another. It's not very long to go now. Kim Leadbeater, thank you very much for coming in. So we'll round off the political week with my panel next. And after the Chancellor's spending review, there is a lot to talk about. But the time now, 6:44.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 60 60 973.
6:46, and it has been one heck of a week. Time now to reflect on it and throw forward as well with my panel, today featuring Annabel Denham, columnist and deputy comment editor on the Daily Telegraph, and my colleague, the new editor of the New Statesman, Tom McTague, who's just written a fascinating profile of the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Welcome to you both. Annabel, let me start with you. Your paper did not like what the Chancellor was saying yesterday one little bit. Other papers have been much more favourable. But either way, this is a huge moment in the story of the government. It's going to set the course for the next few years. It's, there's a lot of hyperbole in politics. This is a really big parliamentary moment. This time it is.
It certainly feels that way. And if I just look very quickly at the short term, unfortunately, it seems that tax rises in the October budget this year are now looking inevitable. One has to ask, after watching the spending review yesterday, where on earth all of this money is going to come from. Rachel Reeves back in December said that she wouldn't be raising taxes again, and yet she's boxed herself into a corner here. And of course, there is that option to borrow more, despite her supposedly ironclad fiscal rules, but in so doing she will just saddle future generations with higher taxes. In terms of the spending, she doesn't really seem to have pleased anyone anyway. As the saying goes, she may have paid the Dane Geld, but she hasn't got rid of the Dane.
Danes all over the place. Annabel, we both know, if you're right and she raises taxes, we know where the money is going to come from. It's going to come from you, and it's going to come from me, and it's probably going to come from Tom as well. But the person who will be watching particularly carefully the reaction to yesterday is, of course, the Prime Minister himself, Keir Starmer. And Tom, you've had the relatively rare luxury, if I can put it that way, of spending quite a lot of time with the Prime Minister over the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've spent the past 6 weeks being with the Prime Minister in different guises, whether it's on an aircraft carrier or on a plane travelling to Oslo with him, or in Downing Street or up in Glasgow. And I had 4 of these occasions where I spent quite a bit of time with him and was able to press him on what it is that is driving him, what is at the core of Keir Starmer and what is at the core of this government. And it's really fascinating because he's so guarded. He's so guarded about himself, about his private life, and about the government. And I think it takes a while, but there is something there.
There's a moment in the interview which I've read and enjoyed very much where he actually starts to cry.
Yes, that's right. And I was not expecting that, of course. And I think it was interesting because it happens at the end of the day. I met him, the most interesting interviews of the 4 are at the end of the day when he starts to relax. All the responsibilities have been done for that day and it's just me left. And then we start to talk about his family, and in particular about his brother, Nick, who was a vulnerable man, who has been vulnerable from birth. And Keir cared for him and looked after him for most of his adult life, felt a big responsibility to look after him. And he died on Boxing Day last year after a battle with cancer. And Keir actually mentions him in the last Labour Party conference speech. And when I started to talk to him, he just couldn't articulate it. The emotions were too raw. His eyes filled up with tears and he couldn't get the words out. And I thought there was something there in that moment about his inability to articulate his feelings. I think he struggles to articulate the feelings of the country. And I think that's the connecting thread with Keir. He thinks if he gets his head down and works through problems and deals with people one-to-one or problems one-to-one, he'll be able to fix the country, heal the country. But I don't think he's able to sort of feel it and feel the country.
Yes. Well, that's really, really interesting, Annabel, because, we bounce from one kind of political leader to another quite a lot in this country. And I compare that with, as it were, Tony Blair, who was brilliantly articulate, wore his heart on his sleeve quite a lot, or even Boris Johnson. Whatever you think of Boris Johnson, he was a communicator. We go through a period where we say, communication doesn't matter that much. It's a bit of a tawdry, third-rate kind of political skill, rhetoric, so what? But actually, Keir Starmer's dilemma shows why it matters so much.
It does, and I think we often forget that communication cuts both ways. Where the public feel frustrated isn't just in lacking a charismatic leader who sets a vision and explains how he's going to deliver it, but also having politicians who they feel do not listen to them. And of course, the most obvious instance of that has been with immigration. In 2010, they voted for net migration in tens of thousands. In 2015 and 2017, 2019, a reduction.
It has to be said, all the big parties have been as culpable as each other.
No, well, that's absolutely right, but you can see the results of that playing out. But I think the problem Keir Starmer does seem to have is a lack of any kind of guiding philosophy. And actually, you talked about some of his predecessors, but Rishi Sunak in many ways was more of a technocrat, had a managerial style, and wasn't always able to articulate what it was that he really wanted to change in Britain, and he suffered for it.
In the end, you have to be able to cut through emotionally if you're a leader. People have to have some kind of emotional relationship. The other thing that really struck me about your profile, Tom, is that, contrary to most commentators and many, many politicians, Keir Starmer doesn't think that this country is fundamentally broken.
That's absolutely right. And this comes back to Annabel's point, which is an ability to understand what is wrong, to analyse what has gone wrong in this country. Why is it that people feel so angry? Why do we have riots in Ballymena or across England over the summer? And I put this to Keir, is there something fundamentally wrong with the model, the economic model, the social model, whatever it is? He doesn't think any of it is wrong. He doesn't think NATO is wrong. He thinks he wants to maintain it. He wants to bring America in, keep America in. The European Court of Human Rights, he supports it. He wants to maintain it. He wants to maintain the economic model in Britain. He wants to maintain the social model. He wants to maintain the NHS, the way that we fund schools, the lot. He wants to protect and conserve what exists at the moment. In some senses, he's a very conservative man.
And you say the most normal prime minister in some respects we've had. Let's just return to the politics of the week, however, because one of the things I noticed from Keir Starmer and indeed Rachel Reeves was, given any opportunity, they don't attack the Conservatives. They don't really bother attacking Kemi Badenoch. They go straight to attacking Nigel Farage. And this has been a week where, partly because of his opponents, Nigel Farage has been more prominent in British public life than many weeks I can remember.
It's just been absolutely extraordinary over the last couple of weeks, really, that Reform are able to absorb so much of the oxygen when they've only got a handful of members of Parliament. And yet, if you look at the polls, of course, it shows that they are pushing ahead of Labour and of the Conservative Party, which is lagging far, far behind. So in some ways, it's not altogether surprising that Labour are beginning to treat Reform like the official opposition. It's very much in their interest to do so, and for Reform to play along with that, to give this impression that the Tories wouldn't win a future general election, and thus, if you are centre-right, lean towards the right, then your best bet would be to vote for Nigel Farage. But, they keep descending into infighting, like rats in a sack, and you just wonder if he's going to be able to hold the whole thing together until the next general election.
Everybody in the right is kind of struggling to work out where to position themselves, including, if I may say so, His Majesty's Daily Telegraph. Sometimes it's a bit more towards the Tories, sometimes it's a bit more towards Reform. But if you're Kemi Badenoch, this is an incredibly difficult problem. It's not just that people are attacking you, it's that too many people on the right of politics and in the media are simply ignoring you.
Oh, I think that her greatest danger is irrelevance. It's that she comes out with policies and nobody's listening, nobody's paying attention. That, or her policies are cribbed by Labour or Reform, as we saw with indefinite leave to remain. It was the Conservatives who first announced those changes, the tightening of the system, and a few weeks later, Labour came out and suggested that it would be government policy. So she's got an almost impossible predicament, really. Disunited Conservative Party, let's not forget that much fewer than half of Tory MPs voted for her to be leader, and they've been trimmed down to just 121 seats, and nobody is really listening to them. So I actually happen to think, I've got a lot of sympathy with her, and I happen to think that her approach is the right one. Do the groundwork now. Come up with policies which she knows will be deliverable, because people are tired of having promises that politicians don't keep.
It's kind of the definition of thankless, isn't it? I mean, the job she's got at the moment. Tom, let me ask you about, there's a sort of, as it were, a matching dilemma that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have got, which is they look at Nigel Farage and his apparently remorseless rise in the polls, and they see his economic policy and they think it's a bit like Liz Truss, and they think they must attack it. And the important thing is to really go for Nigel Farage. But every time they attack Nigel Farage, his portrait in the national picture just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
I think they're comfortable with that, though. Over the 4 times that I saw Starmer, he didn't mention Kemi Badenoch once. I thought of that after the interviews. He mentioned Nigel Farage and Liz Truss a lot. So it's very clear now who they've decided is the principal opposition ahead of the next election, and it's very clear what their strategy is. It is to link Nigel Farage to Liz Truss, and to say, and when I put this to him, he said, I said, isn't the danger, you think the country is fixable? And if you are proved wrong, if you cannot fix this, then you are opening the door to the people that will not fix it. They will blow it up. They want to rip it up and start again. They want to get rid of the European Court of Human Rights. They want to. They question most of the settlement. And he said, yes, but it's not a theoretical challenge anymore, because we've tried it already with Liz Truss. And that is his argument.
Yes. There is a problem with this, however, which I've discussed with colleagues already, which is that if opinion pollsters go to the voters and they say, what do you think about Liz Truss, and therefore the parallel with Liz Truss, voters say Liz Truss was a bad thing. And then if the pollsters say why, voters have absolutely no idea. They can't really remember the details of the bond markets or the mini budget or what happened there. And so saying that Nigel Farage is a bit like Liz Truss might not get Labour very far.
No, I mean, I think that it's ingrained in people's memories that Liz Truss was a bit of a disaster for the Conservative Party. Obviously, she only lasted 49 days in the job as Prime Minister. And she had that mini budget in which she set out to spend more money, but she wasn't talking about where, they were going to cut back government spending, which, of course, is a lot more difficult, as we've seen over the last few weeks with the Labour government. I suspect that Labour will try lots of different approaches to trying to attack Nigel Farage, and his economic policies are probably quite a good way of doing it. If you look at what Reform have announced thus far, it borders on risible. It isn't a coherent economic agenda. And if they are to morph from a protest movement into a serious professional party in British politics, they're going to have to do a lot of work in taking on experts, a policy unit, managers, lawyers, and, really come up with a comprehensive agenda.
Worry about the numbers, as all politicians have to. Yeah, absolutely. Final point, very briefly, if you don't mind, both of you. Looking ahead, there are going to be some big Labour rebellions, I suspect, on welfare, in particular personal independence payments, or PIPs. How much trouble do you think Rachel Reeves still has in the weeks ahead?
Lots of trouble, because not only that, she is under increasing pressure, isn't she, over the tax commitments that she's already made ahead of the election, and which, as Annabel said, are going to be a problem for her as she comes to the budget. So it's not just that. Finding the savings is the problem, isn't it? I just don't believe these savings that are penciled in, and I've heard it too many times before. Yeah.
Well, we were supposed to have a saving with the winter fuel payment, and then apparently the economy improved so much that they felt they were able to reverse that plan. But PIP will be, similarly difficult, and let's not forget that whilst Liz Kendall wants to reduce it by £5 billion, it's still going to increase by £20 billion by the end of this Parliament.
Numbers. Annabel, Tom, thank you both very much indeed. I'll be back with you on Monday. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with the top stories and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download that official LBC app for free from your app store now. We're coming up at 10 on LBC Ben Kentish. And now it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. We're going to concentrate on the terrible Air India air crash, which has killed more than 240 people, more than 50 of them British. Thankfully, incidents like this are a rarity, so when it happens, the world is stunned into shock. More information is coming in all the time, and we'll keep you up to date. But I'd also like you to phone in